Well, let's talk to Paul Charles, who's Chief Executive of the travel consultancy, the PC Agency. Welcome back to the programme, Paul. So as we were hearing, there are huge delays at the port of Dover. The UK government says it's the French authorities' fault. Is it right? What's the cause of this?
Well, we've clearly seen a lack of staff now affect those who were trying to cross the channel by ferry. Undoubtedly, French douane, the customs authorities, have not had enough officers available to deal with the influx of passengers, which everybody knew about. This was always planned to be one of the busiest days of the year and certainly of the summer. So the French are saying it was due to an incident in the Channel, with many of their officers being focused on that. But I suspect there was an element of just not having enough staff available for one of the busiest days of the year. And the French have now put more officers in. But as we've heard, those delays are going to continue for at least 24 hours yet.
So it sounds like they're saying it's a one-off situation, but do you think we'll see similar scenes like this later in the summer?
Well, we're clearly seeing a summer of disruption, a summer of enormous stress, whether it's across road, rail, air and sea, within or from the UK at the moment. And it's for a number of reasons, not just because of a lack of staff among senior officials operating at Dover, but also operating on rail, at the airports. We're not seeing enough workers for the demand that is out there. And this is what we're also seeing as a result of a high inflation environment, where workers are demanding higher pay in order to work effectively. And I'm afraid this disruption across the length and breadth of the country will continue during the summer.
Extra disruption on Britain's roads thanks to fuel protesters. Today, one of the busiest weekends of the year.
Yes, and this is when you're seeing lots of families start to travel across the UK by car as schools have broken up. So the protesters feel that they are protesting against climate change and the effects of that, as well as high fuel costs. And clearly the police and other officials are trying to deal with those. But it is a theme that we've been seeing in recent months, where protesters have been trying to blockade public transport as well as private transport. And that's not going to disappear.
Passengers did have some perhaps slightly more positive news, with Heathrow strikes being off as British Airways staff accepted a pay deal, but there is still trouble ahead for people trying to get away by plane this summer.
Yes, it's very encouraging, actually, that we've seen this breakthrough in the BA check-in staff strike, where effectively they're seeing an 8% pay rise, which is putting them back into the position they were in pre-pandemic. But also, when you add in bonuses and other payments, it's amounting to something like 13%. So the unions, understandably, are very happy about that, bearing in mind inflation in the UK is running at just over 9%. And it gives you an indication of the sort of value of deal that the unions are looking for, not just on rail or at our airports, but across the transport sector as a whole. And it won't be pleasing for the government, who are trying to maintain a cap on private sector wage increases. So 13% is a very high number, bearing in mind the government in its own negotiations with rail firms, for example, is looking at more like 6 or 7%. There's a long way between those two figures.
And we've heard that Ryanair boss Michael O'Leary said he was struggling to get the right number of staff, enough staff. Is that something that airlines should have got on top of by now?
Well, the airlines have been in a very difficult position because of the constantly changing COVID restrictions earlier this year, the delay in opening borders, of course, and the length of time it takes to get trained staff back in place. Understandably, airlines and airports had to lay off people because they couldn't see any end in sight to COVID earlier this year. So it takes some time to regroup, reset, and find new staff and train them. But they've been hampered by the slow pace of getting security passes, as well as those Brexit policy changes, which have meant there haven't been enough staff being able to come back to the UK to work in the aviation sector. I don't see it changing hugely. We're still going to see a continued shortage of staff. But one piece of good news for you is that over the last week, we've seen a 31% drop in the number of flight cancellations from the UK compared with the week before. That's a sizable number and very encouraging as we go into the busiest part of the peak summer season.
Paul Charles from the PC agency. Good to talk to you. Thanks very much for joining us.